Hello everyone, this is update for October 3, 2024, day 953 of the war, end of the date update. Also catch up for October 2 and 1. I'm gonna do very quick discussion of the economic and military political developments, general ones, and then I'm just gonna switch to the situation in Ukraine, as I always do. So first, I don't even show macroeconomic data because things continuing the way they are. So basically, general trends are the same. So for example, in US, labor market is holding on. There's no mass layoffs. At the same time, there's no hiring, so it's kind of like a balanced situation with slight favor towards employers, switching sort of situation. So initiative is switching more towards employers, if I speak in the military terms. So as long as job market, labor market in the U.S. remains okay, things will move forward and in the U.S. because it's a service economy and service part remains strong. It's still growing. PMIs are showing. I showed like I think 55 or something like that. So it's in a growth territory. I'm not saying it's a healthy growth, but things are they're moving along just from a nominal perspective. There's growing imbalances in the U.S. and I mentioned those. They continue sort of grow. They continue getting out of balance, and once there is release of the September U.S. Treasury statement, I'll go over that in more detail. But basically, this sort of inertia is moving on. The debt number in the U.S. keeps growing. I think it's like 35 point, close to 0.7 trillion, slightly less. But it's getting there. So at the same time, there is sort of clouds on the horizon in terms of debt growth, because I don't know if anyone is paying attention, but price of gold is making new highs. There is some very initial negative movements on the U.S. CDS prices, which is essentially risk of U.S. sovereign default. It's totally, I'm not saying this is happening anytime soon, not at all, but there's basically, there are very first initial signs that the market is not willing to tolerate uncontrollable growth of the U.S. debt in the long run. So that's why I was mentioning in the prior videos that whoever is going to get elected in the U.S. is going to have to deal with the debt crisis. And I'm not saying it's happening in 2 months, 3 months. That's not the case. Most likely it's going to happen in a year or two, maybe even 3 years. But sometime during the tenure of the next president, that person will have to deal with extremely acute situation. And that's regardless whether that person wants to do it, doesn't want to do it. It's essentially the future president will have no control over the situation. I think that's the best way to describe what's going to happen eventually. So Europe continues the way it goes. It's essentially close to a recessionary situation there, no changes, and I don't think there will be any policy changes there until there's sort of wholesale, large-scale collapse there. Again, things are probably going to get much worse before there is sort of light at the end of the tunnel eventually, hopefully. And then I'm gonna discuss briefly situation in Israel. Just few remarks. I think the incursion in the South Lebanon is a big mistake because what's going to happen is that Hezbollah simply will move more north. So there's going to be ongoing fights, skirmishes with Israeli army. There will be meaningful losses on both sides, and there's no way to win in that war for Israel. Because in order to win, essentially, Israel has to chase down Hezbollah, and they can move up all the way north of the Lebanon, and then move to Syria if there is a need, if there is such a need. So, in some ways, it's nearly perfect situation to Ukrainian incursion in Kursk region. Essentially, Russia can afford to retreat, and it's not a key region. There's not end of the world is happening, and there's the same thing that's going on with Russia's attempt to capture Kharkiv. There is that incursion northeast of Kharkiv. These are pages from the same chapter for all three countries, and so essentially, this will create a lot of blood and pain for Israel, and eventually it will have to retreat. And that's why that whole invasion is road to nowhere, essentially. So that's all I want to mention on that, and let's switch to situation on the belt or general in Ukraine, which is, I would say, disaster in the making. That's, if I were to sum it up, that's what's going on with Ukraine. And again, I want to put very clearly, blame it's political leadership that's driving that situation. It has nothing to do with people. Ordinary people in Ukraine do everything they can, and I would say beyond that to fight for Ukraine's independence. So now I'm going to walk through the front line in a clockwise fashion, starting with this invasion into Kursk region, which is at this point it's starting to go less and less well, and sort of more and more negative sort of consequences for Ukrainian side. The Russian troops starting to pressure along this road towards Sudzha that's going through Mala Loknya. So there is new pressure access here. And generally, Russian troops are attempting to pressure where they can. They don't have enough resources, as I mentioned before, but they clearly starting to tightening their grip on this whole incursion. So again, this is in the long run, it's going to be road to nowhere, and I would say disaster situation for Ukraine. Now let's move to situation north and northeast of Kharkiv. Things here are more or less the same. What Russian side is doing, they essentially lost control of Chansk, and so they simply razing the entire town and destroying with the gliding bombs, and that's what they resorted to. So essentially, this is sort of the answer is like, if we cannot control it, we're just going to eliminate it. And again, this goes back to the situation where they don't have resources to do anything meaningful, so they just resort to, I would call it, terrorizing campaign, simply destroying this town. Now let's move to situation on the North Lugansk front line. Things here also not going well. There's quite a bit of Russian pressure. There is some lost territory here between this village Cherneshina and all the way to Makyivka. There's no actual villages there, but it's more like fields that were lost. So I kind of a little bit updated map here, but it's not terribly sort of visible. Also, a little bit have unconfirmed information that most of this area in this Serebransky forest has been lost. Don't have sort of independent confirmation, but there's quite a bit of question of what Ukrainian forces control here at this point. Now let's move to North Donbass front line. There is actually surprising Russian advance east of Siversk, straight towards Siversk. Russian forces captured this village Verkhyokamyanske, which is obviously a very negative development, which puts Siversk at very clear risk at this point. Strategically, it's not the worst thing that's happening on the entire front line, but it's just another symptom of things of deteriorating things for Ukrainian side. Now let's move to the southern sector of the North Donbass front line. Also, don't have independent verification, but it seems that Russian troops managed to cross this Siversky Donetsk freshwater channel and establish bridgeheads on the western side of it, and attempting to attack towards this village Stupochki, and there's another village here. So essentially, there apparently Russian troops already sort of moving forward south of Chasiv Yar. Now let's look at the central Donbass section of the front line, where things are, I would say, the most disastrous for Ukraine, and things obviously this is probably where the collapse is most likely to happen or start, generally speaking. So I'm not gonna, this is yesterday's news that Ukrainian forces lost Vugledar, and they essentially retreating, and this is sort of retreat in progress. So the sort of initial stops are going to be this village Bogoyavlenka and Novoukrayinka. So this is sort of intermediate stop, and most likely this is not going to be long-term stop. And the next stop is going to be Uspenivka, and then Russian troops are clearly moving towards this village Dachne from this in this southern sector. Things somewhat more stable in this area around Selidova, not perfectly. There are sort of negative developments there, but at least there is no sort of outright collapses there. I think that's the best way to describe it. And let's actually look. I did not update this map from September 26, but there are several negative developments. Essentially, Ukrainian troops lost Tsukuryne. They only control the most sort of western outskirts. There is railroad that splits this. I don't know if it's town actually or village, but it splits it in two halves, and Russian troops managed to cross across this railroad, so they controlling essentially majority of the village, and probably in the next couple of days the control will be completely lost by Ukrainian troops. So that really is gonna probably create much bigger problem, because there is some couple more villages, but it's essentially situation where Russian troops are. It will be easier to move to continue moving straight west, and then obviously then turn north and turn south. So as I mentioned in prior video, this puts really Ukrainian defenses in very difficult position. Also, Russian troops are basically assault. There is assault on Izmailivka, and it doesn't sound that this village will hold on for much longer. So again, Ukrainian forces most likely gonna lose it pretty quickly. Also, Russian troops managed to breach Ukrainian defenses in this sort of peninsula, and essentially they cleared this whole area, this whole peninsula. So this obviously lost for Ukrainian forces. In addition, Russian troops managed to cross from this across this small river into northern parts of Maksymilianivka. So again, the same situation. Effectively, Ukrainian forces are on the western outskirts of Maksymilianivka, and this village is also in the process of being lost. So, while, as I stated before, there's no, um, shocking collapses, but there are several negative sort of trends and negative developments are in the works, which will eventually lead to sort of shocking collapses in this sector of the front line. At the same time, situation north of Selidova all the way to Pokrovsk is relatively stable, meaning that there is strong Russian attacks, but so far Ukrainian forces are holding on. Doesn't mean that that situation is stable. It's just a temporary stabilization. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. Now let's move to situation on the Zaporizhya front line, where things fairly relatively stable, relatively quiet relative to what we have seen on central Donbass front line. And I'm gonna finish with the situation along the Dnipro River, which is completely quiet. It's a complete standstill on both sides. That's it for the day. Thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye bye.